Our next session is Responsible AI, a Corporate Imperative. Please welcome our speakers to the stage.
Good day, I think, is the appropriate term. It's smack bang in the middle of the day, and it's an absolute pleasure to be moderating this panel, and it's quite a panel, our biggest lineup of some tremendous women. I'm going to introduce them first to you before we dive right in to discuss the corporate imperative of adopting AI responsibly. To my immediate left, Joaquina Salado, Head of AI Ethics at Telefónica, René Parker, co-founder and director of RLabs and chair of RLabs, Jessica Zucker, director of online safety policy at Ofcom, Laura Maher, chief of staff at the Siegel family Endowment, and to my far left, Gabriela Ramos, assistant director general for social and human sciences at UNESCO. Thank you very much to you all for joining. We have a lot of diverse perspectives to discuss this really important topic. And I'd like first to bring us back into the present moment and a reality check, if you like. We've talked an awful lot about AI as the potential for being a public good. We've talked a lot about public interest AI. But actually, where we stand right now, it is a private interest phenomenon. And so the imperative for companies to be acting responsibly is at an all-time high and will be for the foreseeable. And with that in mind, I'd really just like to open the panel up and ask you if you could express what you consider to be responsible AI in a corporate setting, and also what exactly you think is driving the corporate imperative right now. Jessica, if I could come to you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. What I wanted to do is maybe start with painting a picture of the regulatory landscape. I've spent the last couple of days hearing different bits of conversation where it seems to be that people have the perception that no regulation exists, that AI is the Wild West. And I wanted to provide some clarity on this. There are rules for AI, and there are clear new guidelines, especially happening in the United Kingdom, that govern thousands of different tech companies operating their services in the UK, and that includes a number of different types of AI use cases. So I wanted to start by providing some clarity over what we expect and what change we hope to see happen as a result of these new rules. So the Online Safety Act, which came into force a couple of years ago, which my team at Ofcom is in charge of implementing, applies to 150,000 companies, user-to-user search services that operate in the United Kingdom. They have a number of different ways that AI companies and AI use cases apply in these cases, such as platforms that allow generative AI tools that allow users to search from multiple different sources of databases or websites. So for example, ChatGPT, user-to-user services that integrate generative AI tools within their service, so things like Snap's My AI. These are all captured under existing really clear safety rules and obligations. So what this means in practice, if companies are in scope of these rules, they have very clear new legal obligations to prevent the spread of illegal harms and prevent children from coming into contact with harms to children, things that will harm children, excuse me. So whether that is AI-generated or human-generated, the Act doesn't make a distinction. So for example, AI-powered deepfakes of non-consensual sharing of intimate imagery, whether that's human or AI-generated, it's still illegal, it must come down. Same thing with sophisticated AI and fraud, scams, these are things that are illegal and must come down. Worryingly, we're seeing more and more synthetic child sexual abuse material being generated, and again, this is clearly illegal, and platforms have an obligation to take that down swiftly. What we think will make a big difference here in terms of the obligations is that companies in scope of these new rules have an obligation to do really strong risk assessments. So whenever you are changing a service significantly, such as adding a new generative AI chatbot to your service, we expect companies to do mandatory risk assessments and then consult on our codes of practices to look at the unique risks that those functionalities create and then put in place mitigations to address those risks. Many of these will look like having strong and well-resourced content moderation systems, appeals and sanctions policies, for example. And for the largest services, we will be holding them to account to an even higher standard of trust, accountability, and safety. Transparency reporting will become mandatory, and this will be a really important tool for users, employers, investors, company employees, shareholders, to be holding those platforms to account. For the first time, we'll be able to lift the hood and see really how these AI systems are working in practice, how the companies are doing in terms of trying to mitigate those risks and how effective those things are. So just to sum up here, AI rules do exist today. They're very clear, and it is our job to hold those platforms to account.
Thanks, Jessica. And I think also, before we continue the conversation, it's also really important that when we talk about the imperative to responsible AI, we are also talking about company adoption of AI that is not necessarily the AI that they themselves have developed. And Gabriela, I'd really like to hear your perspective on this, as well as being ADG at UNESCO and obviously driving forward the UNESCO recommendations on the ethics of AI. You're also co-chair of the initiative to support social and financial disclosures. So I wonder if you could shed some light on what you're seeing in sort of company practice.
I really like, well, thank you so much for this invitation. And I really like that question because we usually package everything together. Businesses together, people together, governments together. It's just not like that. I think that one thing is the big developers, and it might not be a bad idea that whenever they are bringing these big foundational models to the market, we have the opportunity to evaluate ex ante before they reach the market, that we have the red teamings to think what can go wrong, and these things that are just good governance of any product that reaches the market. But I feel that it's very important to think of all the ecosystem of businesses that have the urge to adopt the technologies to be more competitive. And we are in a blind spot. I love our cooperation because at the end it talks the language that businesses talk. Disclosure. Why disclosure? Because you need to be aware of the risks, of the impact, of the opportunities, of the dependencies, and I'm using all this terminology of the Task Force of Social and Inequalities financial disclosure, of the materiality, the financial impact that you can incur if the adoption of these technologies lead to not positive outcomes. And again, this brings us to a conversation that is not about only the technology, but it's about the frameworks that we have, the benchmarks that we have. And I'm very proud that the Thomson Reuters Foundation and UNESCO, we developed this framework based on the recommendation on the ethics of AI. Telefónica is part of our business council, where we bring the conversation to the question of how do you protect human rights? How do you protect human dignity? How do you allow for fairness? Thousands, or I would say millions, of decisions are being taken by companies on the basis of AI. Are you sure that you're not using biased algorithms? And therefore, to make this responsible and to internalize it in the business model whenever this thing happens. And then we go into something that I feel we have been discussing since the very beginning. How do we create these incentives? Well, the incentives are there. When we go together, we launch this survey, companies answer, and then they realize that they don't have the frameworks. They realize that they are not investing in the talent of people to really make sure that they go to the market and acquire the most safe or the most reliable package to do their services. So I feel this is just organizing the thing. This is not new, because corporate social responsibility, all the things that we know on climate disclosure, on inequalities disclosure, but here is AI disclosure. And we really need to change the incentives so that companies know that it's not about being the good Samaritan. That's great. It's about the sustainability of your own business, not to incur in a liability that might take you out of the game. And I think this is really important. I'm very excited to look, although you know, it's only 18% of the companies that answered the survey that have frameworks to adopt a reliable AI. So we really need to be more cautious about that. But I'm looking forward to the outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've spotlighted exactly why we felt it was so incredibly important to have representatives on our panel from different parts of the business sector. So, Joaquina, I would love to come to you from Telefónica and also hear from René afterwards of two potentially very different perspectives of the business case around that corporate imperative to adopt AI. And I'd love to also hear some of the challenges that you faced in rolling it out.
Yeah. So, yes, hello. Thanks to be here today. So yes, so definitely from a corporate perspective, there's obviously the need and the pressure to make the most of AI, no? And to make businesses more efficient and to use AI. And what we have found and what we believe is that to be able to increase adoption and to be using AI both internally within our business to optimize processes for our employees to use it, but also the impact that it might have to our customers, we really need to build on trust. We really need to have frameworks in place so that what we do with AI within the company is generating that trust and that we have some controls over that. We started defining principles, which I think is something that most of the companies and entities start with. But then you find with the first challenge, which is how to bring those principles, those code of ethics, into the day-to-day of the company, of the teams that are developing or using this technology. So this is one of the first challenges that we found. And we started doing some small work with some specific areas within our business to start writing some guidelines internally, so our people were starting to think about these aspects. But then you really need to reach out to the whole organization. You really need to build the literacy of all the employees, and not only about AI in general, so they understand really the technology and these new waves of technology, with generative AI, agentic AI, but also to train and to make them aware of the possible risks. So there's not only opportunities with this technology, but there are also risks. And it is key that in companies we can build on that. So after that, we started to build an internal framework, so we could be able to evaluate the projects that we were doing with AI and to be able to evaluate those risks. And we started to build this ethical mindset within the company, because that is another challenge. I think companies face a cultural challenge, because you need to align also the organization along this ethical mindset.
Thanks, Joaquina. And I also think that it's really key to acknowledge that for very well-established listed companies to be looking at AI adoption, the risk management and the embedding of that culture is also costly, and it takes some time. I know you have been working on this since 2018, so long before regulation even started to be talking about in the European Parliament, and we'll come to that in a second. But it's really important to contrast that with what responsible AI might mean for an SME or a small individual founder, potentially working in a part of the world where regulation isn't really even spoken about yet. René, I'd really appreciate if you could come in here and just tell us a little bit what responsible AI means in the context of your work, and perhaps where the imperative and the business case lies and how that's different.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So definitely in larger corporations, they have the resources to build in frameworks and all these things. So imagine a SME, right, that's sitting on the continent somewhere in a small city, And of course, we are able to innovate, right? When when you're small, you are able to be agile, you're able to innovate. But thinking about these frameworks is not on your radar at all. And so I represent a network of innovation and technology hubs called RLabs that's focused on the continent. It's over 500 hubs covering 53 countries. So you can imagine what a diverse pool of innovators, entrepreneurs, ecosystem builders these are. And exactly a week ago, we had our RLabs annual gathering, which we have every year in a different country, an African country. And so a week ago, I sat in a room with 1,000 innovators, entrepreneurs across the continent, all keen and energized and passionate about the real-life problems they are facing and the solutions they are building. And so you can imagine sitting in a room like that with all the energy, with all the drive, and you just see possibilities, right? And so fast forward a week later, I'm sitting in a room and we're talking about AI and being responsible. And when I was looking at the two, which is quite a big contrast, because the conversations were really different, but the problems are the same. And I think that's one of the things that we overlook a lot of the time. So for SMEs, you're able to innovate, you're able to change, you're right there in the community where the challenges are, and so you see it immediately. But we need organizations like RLabs that plays the convening role, because that's our responsibility, right? It's to be a convener so that we are able to bring the support structures, the frameworks, whatever's needed for these SMEs. People are innovating. We can't stop them, right? That is happening regardless if you're a big tech company or if you're a young kid from Nairobi, busy creating things. These things are happening. It's happening in our world. We talk about being a global world, but it includes everyone. And I think it's important that we remember that inclusivity is important. That's what drives innovation.
And it's fascinating that the majority of startup organizations on the continent, but also globally, are now social purpose organizations by virtue of the people who are established them. And we talk about AI ethics, and ultimately the ethical sort of mindset of the founder really drives a lot of responsible practice. So it is really interesting that perhaps we're not asking small businesses to impose new frameworks and this to be a costly exercise, but actually we'd like this to be thought of from the start and to provide tools and understanding, indeed, of what responsible AI is. Laura, I'd love to hear from your perspective some of the lessons that you've learned in rolling out AI.
Yeah, excuse me. One of the things I wanted to double tap on, like what a lot of folks have already said, is just like unpacking this word of ethics or responsible. Because I think we find like most companies in most situations think they're doing the responsible thing. Like, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. But like Facebook's leadership, they were trying to connect the world and democratize information, not like crumble our democratic institutions. Like intent matters, but that's obviously insufficient. And AI is, I think a better question overall is like, how is AI shifting power, both within your business, where is it concentrating, but also in the markets that you serve? Who is benefiting from that power? What new vulnerabilities are being created? What information asymmetries are being created? And AI is extraordinarily good at concentrating power. Businesses like that, shareholders like that, but we don't think we're going to get to inclusive economic prosperity by concentrating power among the very few. So I think just for us, like step one, if you care about increasing overall economic prosperity, is just interrogate where those power shifts are happening and like whether or not you want those to happen and what you can do about that. I think another point two is, you mentioned inclusivity. Like, are we pointing AI at the right problems? Like, I think a lot of times we're thinking about productivity and optimization, but what if we pointed it at the problem of inclusion and like how did it solve that problem? We work with a really wonderful partner called Upwardly Global. They help work authorized immigrants and refugees find better jobs that are more matched to their skill sets when they come to the US. And so they, the problem they were interested in solving is like, how do you match their home skills and their credentials in like the US context? How do you play like the buzzword game when you're applying to a job, essentially? And they worked alongside the immigrants and the refugee populations to tweak the algorithm to find better matches. And so that algorithm is used by an organization called HiredScore, which was recently acquired by Workday. So now this solution that was working for a small group of people is finding its way into the mainstream. And again, the problem they were solving wasn't one of, they got at the, inclusion of having everyone get good jobs. They think they've had over 11,000 people find meaningful jobs in the US, but they've also created $100 million worth of economic value, like over the course of their life cycle. And it was because they tried to solve a different problem or solve a problem that they felt was important and responsible. So I guess just my, takeaways is like, where are we shifting power and what problems are we actually using AI to solve?
And René, your RLabs work has really pioneered community-driven models for tech adoption. So what opportunities do we have looking at that sort of ecosystem in terms of driving responsible AI?
I'm giggling because, if I should be sitting, I'm from Cape Town, from South Africa. And if I should be sitting there in the office right now and asking this question, people are going to look at me and question me on why I'm asking them that, okay? And that happens when you don't trust, and so trust is important. And trust comes with time, with proximity, it's relational. And so, the conference itself is called Trust Conference, right? And so we understand that it's a valuable currency at the moment. People trust people. People build systems. So we can't say people trust systems because people are building it. And so how do we create this environment or change the narrative when we talk about trust? And so in RLabs, we are a social enterprise. We started in Cape Town 15 years ago. Our tagline is making hope contagious. You can look into anyone's eyes and you can see whether they have lost hope or not. Simple. It's easy, quite basic. And so our model is, how do we make sure that people believe in something, that they're hopeful for something? And even sitting here and listening to the conversation, everybody's hoping for something. And so in our organization, we do it through training. We run an incubation program, because once you capacitate people and you train people and you empower them and they have ideas, they are able to solve their own problems. So we run an incubator, where we support them, and we run an accelerator. And we managed to scale that into 24 other countries. But it really boiled down to trust. People are only going to trust us if we stand on our models, we have integrity, and we go back to the basics. I think for a long time, the needle has shifted so far, but we are all still human beings. As much as we talk about AI and all these other things, everyone is still a human being. We have basic human needs. And that's what makes us amazing, right? That makes our planet amazing. And so the potential is always there, and we're hoping, as long as people have hope, we are able to do anything.
And what I'm hearing from many of you, actually, is this point about the potential for the corporate sector also to be part of this building an ecosystem where it is possible for companies to act responsibly. And potentially there is a tension between keeping AI strictly to be your sort of point of your competitive edge, and therefore it needs to be strictly kept behind closed doors. But there are also lots of opportunities where the private sector is engaging with other stakeholders in the ecosystem in order to drive responsible AI. Gabriela, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the UNESCO Business Council and how they've played such an intrinsic role in the development of the recommendation and, of course, the continued rollout to drive ethical AI.
Well, that should be the business model in terms of bringing different voices around the table, because then you really learn where people come from, where are their needs, where are their limits, where are their constraints, and you don't go for one size fits all, as usually it doesn't work. So when we adopted the recommendation on the ethics of AI, which was in 2021, 194 countries signing to it, and committing to ensure that not the technology, of course the development of the technologies is very important, but the outcomes is outcome-based. The impact of the technology will not damage human rights, human dignity, environmental sustainability. And so the main interlocutor of an international institution, of course, is governments. They are the ones that settle the rules. You mentioned all of these regulations, and for me, this question of no regulation is a regulatory decision. So at the end, is for governments. But the reality is the majority of these developments are being done by the private sector. Yeah. And the majority of the users are also in the private sector. So the real question there was, how do we engage with them? Because we are going to go all over the world to see how well equipped are countries to use AI ethically, if they have the frameworks, if they have the institutions, if they know about it. But then we need to engage with the business sector. And we were lucky enough to have Microsoft and Telefónica that joined as co-chairs, but then we also have Salesforce and Lenovo and many other companies that just came in because they wanted to learn. And this shows that this is also a space where companies don't have all the answers. They want to sit together, to learn together, to see how did you solve that problem. We were working with Samsung. Samsung introduced a chat box, or I would say they just used ChatGPT to deliver on something, and they got to know that then all the information, inside information was going out in the cyberspace. So I feel that it really provided that space to look into how do we learn together and how do we bring together our experiences to deliver for good. But the real point of bringing the companies that we're trying to show that they care about their impact was really to deliver a different narrative, which is being ethical is good business. You cannot tell companies not to do business. You cannot tell companies not to go for profit. They will not survive. That will be a little bit Pollyannish. What we are trying to show is that doing it the right way, ethically, is more sustainable. They run less risks. They're more aware. They bring together also their workers and their communities, and then it's more sustainable long term. And I feel that we have a very good group of companies that are joining this call that being ethical is good business.
But just going back then to the corporate imperative, the very title of this panel, and how we're seeing that a lot of the much smaller organizations are not having the investor pressure, perhaps that listed companies are increasingly from their institutional investors around the pressure to look at AI responsibly. And what exactly will those levers be if, in the absence of regulation, do we need to engage with a plethora of stakeholders? Is this about a better direction of capital in order to actually drive forward responsible AI? Laura, perhaps you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the roles, of philanthropic organizations like ours is to provide some of that ecosystem building and some of that shared learning infrastructure. Like, we're all learning together, and everyone's learning from different angles. And we as philanthropy, provide a neutral convening ground where we don't have like a market imperative to compete with everyone we bring together. So, excuse me, I'm also coughing up here. But essentially, we can bring together really unlikely coalitions. We can bring together companies. We can bring together labor unions and gig economies and researchers and kind of have everyone seeing each other and sharing pieces of the playbook. Because I think at the end of the day, if we're all working towards a more responsible overall economic sector, then we kind of need to be moving in conjunction with one another. And I think another thing that, another role we play too is just research into what's happening. I know this is something that, Reuters does really well as well, but it's just we need more visibility into what's going on. I think there's a huge focus on job displacement and job retraining, but what about job quality and satisfaction? There are jobs that are not being lost but are changing and are getting worse for people. One of our research fellows has done some work looking at the self-checkout role. And essentially, whereas before it was sort of like a neutral or positive role where you're talking to people and they're checking things out, like now with self-checkout, they're turning more into like a cop role, and they're having largely negative interactions with people, where either they're approaching a machine and someone's really frustrated because it's not working, or they have to stop somebody from stealing something. So like the job numbers have like stayed the same, but the quality and the satisfaction has gotten a lot worse. So I think we also like need to be playing a role like within research into what's actually happening and like elevating best practices across the sector.
Thanks. And Joaquina, you always, forgive me for saying, you surprise me with how generous you are with the information that you share publicly about your journey to implement and build your ethics of AI team. I'd really appreciate if you could share some of that, and also the rationale for why are you being so public about it, given, at the expense potentially of your competitive edge.
Yeah, well, I think as Gabriela was saying, in this type of initiatives, when you join with others, you can share best practices, and you always learn from others, no? Because we are all tackling similar issues, and things are not written about this responsible AI. It is something that needs to evolve because there are these frameworks and ways to govern AI within companies. But there's also a lot of questions about how to operationalize this in an operational way, which also needs to evolve. And by these collaborations, we believe that it's a good way to evolve. Yes, we really think that we can collaborate as well with others to really generate this trust, and be able to escalate more the technology. So that's why we started to collaborate with UNESCO in the Business Council on the recommendation. There's also learnings on that reflection that we have integrated. And even we have been collaborating within our industry with GSMA, which is the telco industry. And it's a win-win situation, I think. So that's why we believe that it is important to sometimes share as well what you're doing in terms of this and to grow together.
The theme of trust and transparency is coming up a lot, and of course that is often driven by compliance, requirements and mandatory reporting. But what sort of role might voluntary reporting actually play in that sort of effort to drive trust and transparency? And also, Jessica, I'd really like to come back to you, because in terms of the global regulatory landscape, this is not going to remain static, and a lot of the companies that we interface with are obviously global companies, so there's a lot of complexity to deal with. How is that going to impact their ability to build trust with their consumers and investors, and also be transparent?
I think you hit the nail on the head here. It's evident that countries around the world are just grappling with this right now. The opportunities, the risks involved in different jurisdictions are, taking their own approach to this. We've talked a little bit about the EU's approach. We've talked about what the UK is doing, which is essentially not creating a new rule book for AI policies, but integrating AI issues into existing regulatory frameworks for privacy and safety and competition and so forth. What that means for companies, especially those that operate across multiple jurisdictions, is that navigating regulatory differences is the new reality. It will be continuously complicated. What our role is, and what I think other regulators are aiming to do, is try to help provide more clarity about where those differences are and where we can converge, where is possible. Ofcom is a member of the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, which brings together 4 of the UK-based digital regulators, so Ofcom, the ICO, the CMA, and the FCA. And we have regular meetings where we can share insights, share best practices, and deconflict across our regulatory frameworks when it comes to shared issues like AI. For example, when we were rolling out recommendations for age assurance, we worked closely through this forum to ensure that our age assurance recommendations weren't in contrast to privacy regulations that were overseen by the ICO. And we're increasingly doing this for cross issues around AI, deepfakes being a big one, horizon scanning around the application of agentic AI being another one in our program of work. And that's just within the UK context. Globally, obviously, this is rapidly evolving as well. Again, we've set up a regulator forum network for online safety regulators worldwide, where we do the same thing, try to achieve regulatory coherence where possible, because we know that that is the best chance to increase compliance and reduce the burdens on companies who are trying to make sense of the different jurisdictions. But again, the reality is the regulatory landscape is complicated, and we're doing our best to try to provide clarity as much as possible.
So advice to companies in terms of, anticipating the continued complexity, but also the emerging regulation, will be to potentially get ahead and use one of these voluntary frameworks in order to start looking internally at their organization so that they're not caught short when the regulation comes around.
Absolutely. Even where there are differences, I think the overarching commonalities is understand the risks that are unique to how you're deploying AI, put in place measures to address those risks, and be transparent about it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up, but before I do, I would really like to ask you all to give me a very, very short answer to one question, which is, in your view, what is the one thing that you think companies should be thinking about right now? Gabriela?
The opportunities and the risks. I think the reality is that I see it. They don't want to be left behind. They can really improve their delivery and their services. They can deliver better for their communities, for their workers. So it's huge. But they need to think about the risk of not doing it right.
Thank you.
I was thinking of, AI is not like a status end state you're trying to get to. It's something that you're going to have to constantly renegotiate. So it's a little about internalizing this dynamic of change and acknowledging that that's going to continue to exist. And it does that's how companies stay competitive overall. So I think that's one big thing. If I would squeeze another one in, it's think about your workers as features and not bugs. They have a ton of innovative ideas and ways to improve the company. So I'll leave it there.
And for me, regulation steps in when individual collective choices lead to collective harms to society, and that's obviously happening today. So for companies, I think the message is you can't delegate AI safety issues to engineering teams or trust and safety teams to deal with on the side. It has to be elevated to boardroom level conversations with company executives taking responsibility and accountability for how their services impact people in the real world.
Responsible AI must be lived, because we see companies struggle when ethics are treated as compliance issues, right? It's actually a culture. And so about building that, and I'd like to leave this, on the continent, we talk about Ubuntu values, which really means I am because we are. And I think if companies just adopt that, they would realize that it's about a collective well-being. And so we need to include everyone.
So in a time where generative AI has really democratized the use of AI across the whole company, whereas before it was in some places, my advice is to train the whole company about AI, about what can do, what cannot do, to really understand it, to be able to use it where it is necessary and make the most of it. And together with that training, you need to include this cultural change and this ethical mindset. So this needs to go together.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.